I embraced pain because I realized how tolerant it made me. When I was 3 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. We were assigned the trials because we were built to handle them.
Your mission is to help others to accept the barriers are meant to be broken.
My general objective is to help people channel the mindset to overcome obstacles. All of these things are scary. Like when I signed up for my first Ironman, that was one of the scariest things that I ever did in terms of putting myself in a position for failure. I had salt all over my skin. I was completely dehydrated. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, Maryland. I wanted to quit. We all have those moments, and it's on us to turn those moments from our pits to our peaks. And that's why it's really important for people to exit their comfort zones and to do things that challenge them. And I Googled how to write a book.
There are a lot of barriers in personal and professional life that seem unbreakable, but actually they're not. My guest today, Bishoy Tadros, is on a mission to help others accept that barriers are meant to be broken. A few facts about Bishoy. At the age of 3, he was diagnosed with leukemia. Then his family immigrated to the United States to help with treatment. At the age of 13, he underwent the brain surgery. As the child battling cancer, Bishoy was never able to unleash his full potential as athlete. This was the barrier he couldn't break. Fast forward. Bishoy has ran his 7th marathon this year. He completed Ironman and he committed to raise more than $1 million for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society to advance the research. Today, I'm sharing Bishoy's story, the story of breaking the unbreakable. Thank you and enjoy the episode. It's important to start our conversation by talking about your mission. For everyone who's listening to this to understand where you're coming from, because you've wrote about your mission a few times and it's a very strong mission. So I wanted to start with this question. What's your mission?
My general objective is to help people channel the mindset to overcome obstacles, whether they be personal, professional, on the playing field. I believe that throughout my personal journey and through my experiences, I've built a formula founded on the 3 Ps of patience, perspective, and purpose that I've been able to apply to all facets of my life, whether it was succeeding in my career professionally, whether it was succeeding in my athletic ambition, my interpersonal relationships. I even joke around that, those 3 Ps were the reason why I was able to lock down my wife ultimately. For me, I believe so firmly in the application of these lessons that I learned in the hardest times of my life, that I've made it my mission to help people accomplish whatever milestones they want to, and understanding, how the 3 Ps can guide them.
I know this, but I wanted the listeners to hear it from you. Paint for me the moment you realized this mission.
So, the background for the audience. I was born in Egypt. When I was 3 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. My parents decided to immigrate, leave everything that they ever knew in order to move to the States to give me a second chance, and really a chance, I should say, at life, because this was 1990 and the medical advancements were not where they were here at the time. So they moved thinking they'd go back, but a year turned into several years of treatment. When I was 13, I needed a brain surgery to remove a golf ball sized mass from the right frontal lobe of my brain. And, that was 10 years of just misery, right? Like you're a child and nothing is going right. Not just the medical aspect of it,
Right.
but I was an immigrant child battling cancer on Long Island, New York. And I just wasn't fitting in no matter which way, socially, emotionally. I wanted so badly to compete as an athlete, a young athlete. And I had to deal with doctors, basically telling me that things that I don't understand around the impact of chemo and radiation and why, despite the fact that I'm the first one at practice and the last one to leave, why I'm still slower than everybody else. And it was painful and it was dark. And coming out of that brain surgery, which was on my 13th birthday, I was in the recovery room. And it was an extremely isolating moment because most people go through life without ever experiencing what a brain surgery is like. But it is numbing. And from your head all the way down to your toes, you're wrapped up because of the inflammation, and it hurts to breathe. It hurts to think. And I remember being in that moment and thinking to myself, life can't possibly get any worse than this, as a 13-year-old boy. And it was in that moment that I came up with my mantra of break barriers. And I decided that the minute I got out of that hospital room, anything life put in front of me, I was going to figure out a way to overcome. And, little did I know at that time that 17 years later, I was going to be writing a book, and I was going to title it Break Barriers, talking about how I applied those lessons from the first 13 years of life and applied them, through the next 17.
On your website, you posted that your mission is to help others to accept the barriers are meant to be broken. First, that's a great mission. The second of all, it's a very powerful mission because there are so many barriers out there that we feel like we cannot break, right? That's like, yeah, there's no way I can do that, right? There's no way he can do that. But then it can be done, right? It's the matter of what? It's the matter of perception, right?
Yeah, it's all about understanding. A lot of times in life, we find it hard to believe that we were assigned the trials because we were built to handle them. And that was something that my parents ingrained in me when I was very young, going through what I was going through. And they led me to accept the fact that despite the fact that I was dealt quite a difficult hand, I was dealt it because I had the strength within. And it was on me to find that strength. And that helped me in future moments of life where when you put things in perspective, a lot of the obstacles that I came about later in life, although difficult respectively, didn't measure into what I had to deal with as a child. And I dig into that a lot, and I lean into it. And I think to myself, if I overcame what I overcame back then I can do this right here, right now. And, nothing is going to stop me from that. And that's why it's really important for people to exit their comfort zones and to do things that challenge them. And I tell people, you don't realize how strong you really are until strength is all you have. And that is really particularly important. You're not going to if you avoid difficult situations and if you avoid hard things, you are never going to reveal your strength. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was put in a position where I had no choice but to reveal my strength at a young age. And now it's just a matter of not forgetting that I have it and leaning into it in moments that I experienced throughout my lifetime.
Who did you get the support from at that time when you were a kid, right? I don't know, is there, does a child, a 13-year-old can think of religion or who gave you the support and how you were thinking about it or looking for it?
Yeah, and my parents were definitely, my main beacon of support. And my parents, they are Christian parents, and then they lean into their faith very heavily. And, they prayed a lot during that period. They raised me to embrace Christian virtues. But, that being said, as an adult, they never shoved me in one way or another. But when I was a kid and I was going through what I was going through, they had the most powerful levels of faith, which guided me through my treatment and which guided me through the ups and downs. And, at the end of the day, like they believed in the strength being provided by God. And they knew that there was nothing that, could be handed to them that couldn't be handled. And they passed that on to me. And that was part of their mindset of like explaining to me that I wouldn't have been dealt that card if I wasn't built to handle it.
That's a very powerful message. Is there anything you think that in retrospective, you would want to get as a kid, or someone else that are struggling or battling with the same problem right now as the kid? Where do you think they can kind of look up for the support that they need right now, or lean to accept parents that they have? Or
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that, I tell people that growing up, I thought everybody went through something like this. Like I didn't realize that I was living my own story. And I had to grow up very fast because of it, right? Like I was a 13-year-old that experienced more than, some adults had to that point in life. But I thought that was normal. And because of that, I suppressed my story. I didn't talk about it. I didn't really talk about it until I was 30. And that's because I thought, oh, like everybody has gone through something like this. This is of no value to the rest of the world. So what I would tell someone younger going through it is lean into it and speak about it and don't hold back and don't be embarrassed because your story is perhaps a lot more powerful than you give yourself credit for, and your ability to impact other people is really what leaves a mark on this world. And I was listening to a podcast recently referring to a book called The Road to Character, and it talks about the difference between resume values and eulogy values, right? And it talks about you can accomplish X, Y, and Z throughout your lifetime, but unless you leave an impact on other people, what are they going to be saying about you at your funeral? And the most successful people sometimes go through the most I want to think of the right word. They go through the most rehearsed funerals, as opposed to the people who take the time to understand what it is about their humanity that can make an impact on others, and really leaning into that.
Another perspective on this, it makes you a person, right? Like sharing this story and talking about it, and then kind of using it, right, to bond with others, to build relationships, right? It's very powerful because this is something that I've spoke about with other guests on this podcast. The fact that we are building these facades in the business environment very often, right? That you kind of don't see who the other person is because you know their title, you know the sort of like corporate culture you're in, you know what kind of communication you can have, right? But then if you shut down that facade, you'll see, hey, that there's another person with other problem, right? So being that person and sharing that message is very powerful. And I know that sharing your story and being open about it and the message also helped your career. So can you talk to me and kind of how did your story unfolded after that time of, after that kind of surgery, you're 13 years old. What was next for you? What key moments have brought you where you're at right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to fast forward about 17 years after that brain surgery. I was close to my 30th birthday. I had gone through a period of seeking fulfillment in my professional career in my mid-20s. And again, I knew I had something. I didn't know how it was going to pan out, but I knew I had something to share with the world, and I didn't know when it was going to be appropriate, and I didn't know how or if I was ever going to do it. Long story short, I decided to run the New York City Marathon back in 2017. In order to run, I needed to gain entry by raising money for charity to get my race bib. I decided to raise money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I wrote down a story called "The Comeback is Always Greater Than the Setback." That was a saying that I always firmly believed in because I felt like in life I was starting to see it come true. I realized I had many setbacks going on in my life, but slowly I was pushing through, pushing, trying to make a comeback. And every little hint of success showed me how much greater it was to push for that comeback relative to the darkness of the setbacks. And within that story, I talked about the 3 Ps. I talked about the learnings that I had. I didn't really talk about, the biography. I really just talked into the lessons. Mm-hmm. Anyway, after I shared it, $1,000 turned into 5, turned into 10, turned into 20 and 30. And then I got a call from NASDAQ, and they said, hey, we got a hold of your story. We'd love to invite you to ring the closing bell. So all of a sudden, my story was getting national TV attention. Wow. At the time, I was working in banking for 7 years. And at that point, I was really leaning into how can I take my career to the next level. And I realized that unless I was able to bring my whole self to work and not suppress this story anymore and not hide the fact that this is who I am and this is my mission, I was never going to succeed in my career, because the two go hand in hand. If you can't bring yourself to work, your full potential will never shine through. So I came back, and a couple of things happened. I was invited to speak at a couple of companies and talk about the success of fundraising and how succeeding as a fundraiser will impact you as working in a sales organization. And in December of 2018, I was sitting at my desk at JP Morgan, and I Googled how to write a book. And I also Googled how many words you need to write to reach 100 pages. I felt at that point in time, I needed to invest in my story. I had no literary background. I didn't know what I was doing. I never wrote a book before. But I said, I'm just going to do this. I started bringing my laptop to work, and during my lunch breaks, I would type away. In 3 months, I finished that first draft. I reached out to a friend who went to Harvard, and I said, hey, like, you've got to know someone that's published. He did. That person looked at my long Word document, and he said, this is good. Can I give you my editor? And then he gave me his editor, and me and the editor, 6 months later, we published it. So it was 9 months from that Google search to when the book was published. And that's very fast for writing a book. But it was a real testimony to how hell-bent I was on just getting this message out. And I didn't have a goal in terms of book sales. I didn't even care if the book got sold. I said to myself, as long as this book gets in the hand of the one person who needs it to drive an impact, to help them understand that, like, I was a normal kid. I wasn't gifted in any arena. I wasn't the best looking. I wasn't the smartest. I wasn't the fastest. I dealt with cancer. Like, nothing was really working out for me. But here I was, understanding that all it takes was one step at a time. Do the Google search. Write a couple words a day. Keep showing up. Ask for help when you need it. And then before you know it, you're at a book release signing books. And everyone's now, asking you for a picture. I really leaned into that. And then that was my process.
Book is for me, it's like this kind of huge project, right? Like an elephant that you just need to kind of to take, and it requires a lot of different things, right? And again, this is something that I know about you, but if you can speak more about this, like, you always take on huge projects, like you took on the Ironman, right? So tell me, what goes in your head when you do this, when you have this big beast in front of you that you need to take on? Maybe you can go back to the time you prepared for the Ironman. Like, what goes in your head? How do you prepare? What's the mindset for it? And then how do you then incorporate that in your sort of like routine? And what's the process? Because I'm sure that people listening to this, they also have this huge projects that they are currently either afraid of, or they sort of like just going and they say, okay, I have this huge project, I need to start, right? You've done several of those huge projects in your life. Talk to me about how we can, finish those projects successfully.
Yeah, and I want to be clear so everyone knows. All of these things are scary. Like, when I signed up for my first Ironman, and I talk about this in the book, that was one of the scariest things, if not the scariest thing that I ever did in terms of putting myself in a position for failure. And I talk about it, how I shut things down for 5 months. I wasn't going out. I was training twice a day. I cut off most of my social relationships. My parents were questioning what my thought process was. People kept asking me, why are you doing this? And I couldn't answer the question. And the story was that I got to race day. And for those that don't know, a half Ironman is a 70-mile race. It's a 1.2-mile swim, a 56-mile bike ride, and a 13-mile run. I got through the first mile of swimming, and for me, swimming was supposed to be the hardest part. And I got out at a respectable time, and I said, okay, good. I hop on the bike. It was 93 degrees outside, and it was the same week as the New York City bike tour. Mm-hmm. And that week, the company that I rented the bike from sent me a hybrid instead of a road bike. And for those that don't know what that means, it's like ordering a Ferrari and just getting a beat-up minivan. And so now I'm pedaling away at this bike, and everyone is flying past me. And all I keep thinking to myself is, for the last 4 or 5 months, people ask me, why are you doing this? And I had no answer. People are asking me, you're not an Ironman. Like, why'd you even sign up for this? You paid for this? Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't know about this. And around mile 40 of the race, I completely broke down. People flew past me. There was no such thing as a goal anymore. I had salt all over my skin. I was completely dehydrated. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, Maryland. I wanted to quit. I was turning 30, and I remember thinking to myself, let me just call my mom and get out of this.
Mhm.
And it was in that moment, it was the first time that adult Bishoy transcended time and really leaned into young Bishoy. And it was the first time that I had visions of the tubes that were going through my body as a child for them to feed me, right? The feeding tubes. They had to put an insertion through my chest and in my neck in order to just, continue to keep me nourished. And the IVs everywhere. I think
Right.
about the staples that were put in my head during brain surgery. And I think to myself, if he could do what he did, you can figure out a way to finish the last 30 miles of this race. And I also thought about the lessons my parents taught me. When I was younger, I remember they used to celebrate small wins along the way in my treatment. And they would get excited about things that I wouldn't understand by.
Right.
And it kind of made me think, what if I turned the next 30 miles into 1 mile increments? And what if I celebrate every mile? So instead of running 30 miles, I ran 1 mile 30 times. And that's how I finished that race. I celebrated every single mile. And when I crossed that finish line, I realized I can do just about anything that I put my mind to. And that's why my podcast is now called Mile 40. Because I believe that as humans, the one thing that unifies us, regardless of our circumstance, you could be the wealthiest person in the world, I don't care. Regardless of who you are, you have your own Mile 40 moments. You have your pits. You have your moments where you bottom out.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is I want to unify us as a humanity to understand that we all have those moments,
Mm-hmm.
and it's on us to turn those moments from our pits to our peaks. And I bring on people to talk about, that trajectory from the moments where they bottom out and how they build themselves up from there.
Wow. In one of your articles, I like you wrote, being mired by difficult circumstances physically, mentally, and emotionally was undoubtedly one of the biggest accelerations for my personal growth. Can you expand on this? What did you mean? And again, you've made a few examples right now, but then why is that acceleration?
Because you don't realize what you're capable of until you put yourself in dark moments, right? Like signing up for your first race if you're a runner, or speaking up in that meeting if you feel like, you're concerned about what superiors might have to say, sharing your ideas, voicing your ideas, asking that person out on a date. It's things like that which help you realize where you perhaps make mistakes in order to improve them, but also where your strengths lie so you can amplify them. And unless you're willing to get a little bit uncomfortable, you're never going to fully realize what it is that you're capable of.
Your message is here that we need to specifically put ourselves uncomfortable in the situation where we can actually accelerate and grow, right? Look for those situations, not stay in the comfort zone. Is that the message? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Seek out discomfort. Like I'm a huge believer in that. A lot of times we make up this story around the worst case scenario in our head, but there's like a best worst case, and then there's a worst case. And you need to ask yourself, and, I need to give credit to someone who I recently had on my podcast, where he talks about, have you thought about like the best worst case of like what could actually really go wrong? And the best worst case really isn't that bad. And, a lot of times people don't want to go there. But if you lean into a little bit more, you realize that, worst case scenario, you don't finish the race. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, you don't get the job. Worst case scenario, you lose your job. I understand, it can sound like a horrible loss to lose your job, but when you really put things in perspective around what losing your job could result in, there's a lot of worst cases. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to that race. When there is a mile 40 and you're already exhausted and there's a pain, and then you can continue for another 30 miles. Wow, it's a really our body is capable to actually like withstand that kind of pressure when you feel like there is no energy, there is no nothing. You can actually go and do that. It's
It's
fascinating.
more about your mind than it is
It's
about your
mind.
body. It's your mind.
Uh-huh.
Like the truth of the matter is anyone can do a marathon. Like like you see these para athletes completing marathons, right? People without legs finish marathons. I've seen someone bear crawl a marathon. You see blind people doing marathons all the time. And that's what I feel like a lot of people are really setting limitations upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And those limitations aren't physical, they're mental. Like every single person can run 26.2 miles. It might take them a lot longer, and that's okay. When I was at the New York City Marathon last year, I ran with an 88-year-old who finished the marathon. I met him before the race, and then I saw him after the race. And it just goes to show, like, like I've heard people in their 40s and 50s say, like, they're too old, or, their bodies would never be able to.
Mm-hmm.
This man was 88 years old, and he completed the New York City Marathon.
I was watching a lot of videos of David Goggins, and I was like, yeah, it's cool, it's fine, it's funny, but then actually you can do that, actually. And I think you are the first person besides David Goggins that I know that actually kind of, that can the mindset
That's good
can change.
That's good company to be in.
Yeah, right.
So I read Can't Hurt Me
Mm-hmm.
right before I published Break Barriers, and that's why my book cover is like a very serious. Like I basically got my book cover from his book and from some other books, and they said that smiles don't sell, so you got to look serious in those book
Yeah.
covers. And David's book was one that inspired my cover.
I listened to one of the podcasts with the guy, the Diaries of CEO, and one of the guests that he had was talking about the fact that our bodies were made by evolution more stronger than they are. So very often we just suppressing some of those mechanisms that are inside the body. So actually we can survive and we can do some things. And it's interesting when they talk about the fastings and the way fasting works. And some of the things that I open up for me was the fact that after 17 hours of going hungry or something, our bodies start producing a hormone that would allow us to be stronger, more focused, and it helps with the overall stamina because it kind of gives the signal to our body that you need to do something to get yourself fit, right? So it's sort of like you need to hunt or something. And at that time there's also this hormone that helps you to heal all the wounds that you have, so it kind of helps the healing inside that. And I start testing that, and honestly it's like in those moments when you need to be at the peak of your training and you are hungry and you don't your body doesn't think about the digestion, actually works. And I've seen myself doing more training when I'm hungry and I didn't eat for like 15 hours, etc., before that. So it's interesting when you put this into the perspective when you run a marathon and you feel that okay, the body doesn't have any energy or something, but then mind helps you to put a certain mechanism in motion that allow you to produce another energy. So it's certain like levels of energy that you have in your body, right? So the fact that what you did and what David is doing in his videos and with the lifestyle actually can work, right? And actually works. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously that is what happened to me during the Ironman, but I talk about it even in my first marathon, like right around mile 23. I believe it was one of those kind of moments where I said to myself, like, I don't know how I'm going to make it to the end, but you don't realize, what your mind is capable of when it takes over.
Can we talk about pain? Because you also wrote something that stuck with me. You wrote, pain was my advantage and I was built to embrace it. how did you embrace pain?
I embraced pain because I realized how tolerant it made me, right? Like, from a physical perspective, like I had my head stapled together, right? Like it doesn't really get more painful than that. Like I had tubes coming out of places they shouldn't be for a child. I was injected hundreds of times. So, you know, pain doesn't hurt me. But, that physical pain trained me to handle emotional pain. Like you can't hurt me emotionally. You can't break me emotionally. And that's what physical pain taught me. Physical pain taught me like get back up. And, that it taught me that like rejection is part of the process. It told me that you're gonna bleed and it's gonna hurt, but it's gonna heal. And, you know, that's what pain taught me. And so, you know, I think that one thing my wife would say about me is that I'm pretty patient. Like it takes a lot to break someone who's already been broken. And so that's why I think it's important to be okay with pain, because it will strengthen you and it will refine you, right? Like if you don't open up to pain, then you'll get knocked out on the first shot. But what you want to do is you want to build resilience and you want to build stamina, emotionally as much as you want to build it physically.
I think one of the best people that I work with, and something that, again, it might sound weird, but whenever I'm working with someone and I see or I know that they had a certain trauma or a certain story in the past that made them this refined, resilient, I want to work with these people more because I know that they have patience, right? I know that they can be reliable, and I know that they know the price of things that they are not just giving, right? So the question for you, obviously now you have a child and you wanted to make the best life for the child, right? The best you can do. But then it means that you want to protect from pain, you want to protect from this. So what how do we do about this? So it's like, do you think that still at the end of the day, everyone who have their own struggle, have their own pain, or you would be putting child in certain situation when you need to develop that toughness, or or like in a certain job situation or certain personal situation to get the refined as early as the person can.
So my daughter's only 1 year, 1 year old right now. So and I'm new to parenting, and undoubtedly it's one of the biggest challenges that I've been up against in my life is there is no right answer for a lot of these questions about like how do you handle a lot of these things. But I do remember and I do appreciate the fact that my parents let me fall down so that I can get back up.
Okay.
And that's something that I'm really grateful for. Were they probably keeping a watchful eye at times when I thought they weren't looking? Yeah. But, it's my hope that the way I approach my daughter is similar, where you build a good foundation, you instill the values, you teach right from wrong, and you set an example, especially for young children. Children don't care what you say; they care what you do. And it's my hope that the foundation is solid enough so that way, when she's older in life and she falls down, which is inevitable, she knows how to get back up. And if she feels like she needs help, she's not afraid to ask for it. And I think that's the best that I can do based on what I know now. Again, only 1 year into parenting, so we'll have to sync back up in a couple of years, maybe.
Yeah, the reason I asked, one of my first jobs was this company when my managers and the whole company was super tough, and I was like working from opening the office, closing the office. It was a very challenging job. Every time I didn't hit my sales quota, I was just, Michael, you're out of the job tomorrow. And I was like, I need to do something about it, and I was just grinding it. And my brother, he was looking for the job back then. He's younger than me. And he was like, Michael, maybe I can work with your company. And what I did, I said, no, I don't want you to work here. And as if I kind of didn't want him to get to that pressure. So now I'm just thinking, not necessarily, with regards to our conversation, but generally, did I do wrong, or did I do good with him with regards to not giving him that grinder, right? At the time when he could, maybe it's going to be better for him. So now putting in the perspective the professional environment, right? Like, I am a business owner and I'm building an environment when people in the company are well respected, well treated, very comfortable, super free space with everything, right? Obviously there are challenges in terms of the business, but there's very good environment for people to kind of grow. But there's no pain, right? There's no mountain to climb. And because you don't feel that if you not do something, then you will lose it, right? Like, completely lose it. And right now in the environment when everyone working from home, when there's different options, when there's a lot of inclusion in the workplaces where it's not just about the business right now, it's about relationship with the people. The question for you, and then again, maybe we can just kind of ponder on it and think maybe there is a good answer for it or not. But do you think that everyone should have a difficult boss, someone like Devil Wear Prada, or someone that would be tough on them in the professional environment, or no?
That's an interesting question. And no, I think no. I don't think that having a difficult boss teaches you as much as having a powerful mentor or a good leader, right? A difficult boss, can hurt you emotionally. It can impact your mental health and your wellness. You're not going to learn much from a bad boss, except maybe what to look out for in your next boss. But those learnings about what to look out for in your next boss are so minimal to the positive impact that a good leader could have. A good leader could take you to levels you've never seen. A bad manager is just going to show you a few characteristics that you don't want. And it's kind of like, it's like dating, essentially. It's like, like your partner is leaps and bounds above the person you only went out with once and, you don't have much in common with. And so I don't want to like discount the value of people, but I don't think you need to have a bad boss. I think that could you learn from it? Yes. But do I think it's a necessity? No.
I never understood the okay, let me put this in a different way. So I think that, the more you have different events in your life, like you're going to probably publish a few more books, you're going to have a successful podcast, you're going to have a successful business, a lot of things, a lot of events going to be happening for you. That's going to refine you more and more and more. So now you would be kind of not as easygoing person probably as you are, just because of the things that you need to handle. And at that point in time, the level of demand that you're going to have for people probably will be even higher. You would be required for them to perform at their A game at all time, because you don't have time for the bullshit, right? Like, you need to get it, right? Because you ask it for yourself. So I think that's the point in time when people are gonna say, oh, yeah, Bishoy is hard on me. It's like he asked me to do all of that all the time. And he's like, because you've been there, you've been through that, and you know that this is what is required for you to perform at that level, right? If you want to do a marathon, you need to do a training twice a day for 5 months, because you're not going to get there. So at some point in time, when you're going to be only running the marathons, you will need to have people that are training with you twice a day, showing up, doing all the diet, right? All of those things. So, and again, maybe I use I didn't use the right wording with like bad or good boss. I think like the person that demands absolute best of you at all time, that you don't like, that puts you out of the comfort zone, right? So do you think that this is the job for the great leader, to put you out of your comfort zone and be with you there with your own example, or and then do you think that people will consider that person to be a good boss or a bad boss if you have that person in your life, like putting you out of comfort zone all the time?
I think a good leader will be in the trenches with you. They won't just tell you to go to the trenches, right? And I think that's what's really important as a differentiator there, right? Like a good leader in a professional sense isn't just going to tell you to exit your comfort zone in a meeting. They'll be sitting with you in that meeting, exiting their comfort zone with you, or complimenting you as you push through in whatever difficult presentation you need to make, right? And that's how it works, right? Like it's kind of similar to parenting. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. And as a leader, the way you're going to be most impactful is by showing your people that you're in it with them too. And I think that's 100% more impactful than a leader who just tells you to do things that are outside your comfort zone. And I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, to be present, to show up, and then to get that refinement together, right? Because that's one thing when, and again, even thinking about the, children, right? So generally, if you show up and you kind of get that pain with them together and be there for them, and you go through that motion together, showing how you can get at the end of the motion, right? Then they can learn, but at the same time, they would know they're not alone in that whole situation, right? And the same goes with the professional or with the exercise related whatever, right? I learned from you when I was doing the research for the interview an interesting definition, servant leadership, and it stuck with me as well because I rarely see this two words together, servant leadership, right? So can you explain to me again and for the listeners, who is the servant leadership, and then how did you ended up using this combination of words, this definition, and who was that servant leader to you in your life?
So servant leadership is something that I've definitely come across, on various books that I've read, and really something that I've always really believed in terms of I don't believe that as a leader you should be sitting on a throne. I believe that as a leader you should be working for others. Adam Grant has written several books about servant leadership that I've definitely taken notes on. But for me personally, an example of a servant leader and someone who really changed my life drastically was before I ever shared my story back in 2017, before I shared money to fundraise for the New York City Marathon, I wrote down the story on a piece of paper and I shoved it in a drawer because I was very vulnerable. I was scared that if I put it out there and nobody donated, I was going to lose the power of that mile 40 moment. I was going to lose the power of crossing that finish line and that realization that I could do everything. And if someone stole that power from me in my most vulnerable state, I was going to be in a dark place because all my life I was holding on to this story that I never shared. And it was a couple of weeks after I shoved it in a drawer where I reached out to someone who was mentoring me professionally at the bank. And he was a very successful managing director. And we had only talked about my career. We never really talked about my personal life. But I really liked him. And I really thought he was a real person. He was very authentic. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to, move this into a personal relationship and see what happens. And I said to him, Tim, do you mind taking a look at this story and letting me know what you think? He looked at it and he laughed at me because my goal was just $3,000. That was the minimum I had to fundraise. And he said, Bishoy, you need to raise $100,000. And he gave me $1,000 and he said, go. And that's all I needed. But, I know it sounds like, I know $1,000 is not light, but you might think, oh, in that 3 seconds, that person really impacted you. And I can't tell you the power of that 3 seconds, because within that 3 seconds, he told me I can, that I will, that I'm worth it, that I'm valuable, that my story is powerful, that I have the ability to impact, that I shouldn't look back, that I should stop holding on to this, that I'm going to impact many, many more people. In 3 seconds, he told me all that. And it wasn't even about the money. It was simply the make your goal $100,000 because you can do it. Aim high because you can do it. He didn't even blink. He didn't even think about it. To him, it was so obvious. And that for me is servant leadership. Servant leadership is lifting up those around you to meet their highest levels of potential when you have nothing to gain from it. He had nothing to gain. It's funny, like I mentioned him in the book, and I put him in the acknowledgments, and I sent him a copy of the book, and he was very grateful for it. But I could tell he wanted no credit. And that says a lot about an individual. If it wasn't for him, there would have been no marathon, there would have been no fundraising, there would have been no book, and you and I wouldn't be speaking today.
Sometimes when we make a kind of a decision to support someone or that would affect someone's life, I've had that multiple times, that I don't put a lot of thought into this. I just do it. But that at the other end might affect a storyline of that other person a lot, right? So I think that the message here also to be able to open and supportive for others, right? And be those servant leaders, right? Because I think that the servant leadership doesn't necessarily mean, as you said, you need to be a manager or a founder or a boss or whatever, right?
You could be the person on the street. Doesn't matter who you are. All you need to do is lead by example. All you need to do is shine a light so that other people can, meet their highest levels of potential. It involves humility. It involves being a servant leader. You know what I love about it? Like, you could be the quietest person in the room, right? But it's all about your actions. It's all about your conviction. It's all about your kindness. And it's about your investment in others. And I think a lot of time people forget that. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues. He was very successful. But you know what? At his funeral, I don't think anyone's going to be talking about what he did at the bank. What they're going to be talking about is stories like this. And that is what really matters. And when I go down one day, that's what I want. I don't want to be talked about for a list of accolades. I want to be talked about for my ability to do what he did for me. And my hope is that I could be half the person that he was one day for someone else.
I want us, because I know we still have some time, I wanted us to touch base on something very important, but something that I want listeners to all listen to, get, digest, and take it home with them. So there are three words that also stuck with me from your articles, from your interviews: patience, perspective, and purpose. And you did really great job putting examples into those three words as well. So I want us to sit down on this, and if you can help me to digest what is patience, perspective, and purpose in your philosophy, and giving examples of what you can, what you've been going through, battling leukemia, right? And getting to those three keywords that now, as you pointed out in one of your articles, are the key tenors that you are living by right now. So can we get our listeners throughout the time that you discovered these powerful three words in your life, and what do they mean, and how you now can use them in your professional career?
Yeah, so the three of them all date back to childhood, right? Patience was the idea you can't have the results you want when you want them. And that was something I had to deal with a lot as a child, right? Being told I can't do this or that, when I want to do it. And that was just a natural byproduct of treatment, right? you're not healthy enough to do this yet. And explaining that to a 10-year-old is very difficult, especially when all the other 10-year-olds are doing it. Perspective, the idea that, you were built to handle this. I alluded to it earlier, right? That was something my parents really instilled in me. And it really kind of guided me throughout that period. And when challenges came in my adult life, I remembered that. And then purpose, right? The idea of doing things that make you uncomfortable, because then you realize what it is that you're capable of. And, some of those things I had no choice, right? Like I didn't have a choice around brain surgery. I didn't have a choice about treatment. I didn't have a choice about, having to be open about some of my circumstances as a young child, to whatever degree that was, about explaining why I'm different when I'm 10, 11 years old. But those experiences taught me a lot. And those experiences then translated to, my adult life. In my career, when I graduated college in the heart of the financial crisis, I wanted to work in banking. But I wasn't deterred by the fact that I didn't get hired or that I was unemployed. I just realized I had to be patient. And in the meantime, being patient meant being able to formulate a story to tell. And I talk about how I built up a narrative for 2-3 years until I finally got that interview at JP Morgan. And that was patience, and perspective. I believe that, I was put in certain roles in my career, not necessarily because they were the best roles for me, but they were the roles that were going to teach me to get to where I wanted to get. And then purpose was doing things like ultimately accepting that I can't be as successful as I want to be in my career unless I'm Bishoy, the cancer survivor, the author, the podcaster first. Like if you go to my LinkedIn profile, it says author of Break Barriers, post a Mile 40, and then account executive at Salesforce, in that order. And that's because that's who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm not defined by my work. And that makes me successul at my work.
I also know you have a commitment to raise $1 million for Leukemia Society. Can you speak to this as well, and how maybe people can donate or how we can support the cause?
Absolutely. I to date have raised $125,000 for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society dating back to 2017. And a year ago, I committed to keep running the New York City Marathon every year until I raise $1 million. So every year I have a fundraising campaign. I have a fundraising page that's going to be going out soon. For anyone that's interested, you could also reach out to me, Bishoy at bishoytadros.com. Send me an email and I'm happy to send you the link.
You mentioned that this money won't just go to the patients, but also you wanted to support the staff, right? The nurses.
It will go to research, to cancer research for blood cancer. Okay. Yes.
That's research.
Primarily what the Leukemia Lymphoma Society does is they allocate the money toward research for blood cancers.
I keep in tabs of where the research is going just generally right now, from the time you've been diagnosed to now. How did the medicine progress through the time? Did you see some advancements?
Yeah, there's been so many advancements with regards to the treatment that they've made over the years. And, they're doing such incredible work. So I can't speak too much to the specifics because it's not really my field, but the level of innovation that they've been coming out with, I got a lot of the updates. I'm reading up on them. But it's such an incredible cause that needs attention, and the Leukemia Lymphoma Society has been really leading the way.
Awesome. So as soon as you have the link, although we might publish this podcast, we still can go back and edit and add the link to the people in the description section to kind of go and do that. All right.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you think we kind of missed from your story, from your background, and from the message and the mission that you wanted to deliver to the listeners that you think we need to spend a few more minutes to tell?
I think in terms of my story, we've really hit all the talking points. But what I want people to take away from this is what I had said earlier, right? Like, I firmly believe that there's nothing special about me. And I think that the one thing that unifies us outside of the fact that we all have obstacles is that we all have the ability to take the first step. And the first step is really what matters the most. whether that's the first step toward, fulfilling a goal that you have in your
Right.
personal life, or the first step toward taking an approach to solving something in your professional life. And I really want you to know that there are a lot of people out there that are just normal people like you and I, who have what it takes. And I say that because as I've grown the Mile 40 podcast, I've just gotten to know so many people who are walking through life with a toolkit really, really built on their own experiences. And I want people to lean into the fact that we all live individual lives. We all have individual experiences. We all go through our ups and downs that, others don't know about. And in those moments, we are refining our own toolkit, and we are building our own supply of ammunition in order to grow, to learn, to prosper, and to leave an impact on this world. And, that's what I want people to take away from this is take that first step, because that first step, can take you very, very, very far. And don't forget, the last mile, they say that the line for a marathon, the last mile is the loneliest, but it's also the one where you start to see the finish line. And if you keep an eye on that, you can go very far.
Bishoy, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing the platform, and sharing your story and your mission. We appreciate you and appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me today. It was a pleasure.